Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be taking a closer look at a book that you, our listeners, have been recommending for a while now, actually. Paulo Coelho's The Alchemist. And it's not just a popular book, it's one of those ones that really sticks with people.
Yeah, it's often described as like a charming fable, lots of wisdom packed in there about listening to your heart, following your dreams, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. But for this deep dive, we really want to go beyond just the surface level of the story. We want to understand, what makes this book tick? What are the core ideas that have resonated with so many people worldwide?
It's interesting. Even before we get to the shepherd boy and his journey, we have to talk about the book's backstory because it's almost unbelievable.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Coelho himself talks about it in the foreword of the book, how The Alchemist was initially received in Brazil. And, well, it wasn't exactly a bestseller.
I imagine not if we're talking about it.
One copy sold in the first week, and then a second copy 6 months later to the same person.
Wow, that's rough.
Can you imagine that?
And then, just to add insult to injury, his publisher canceled the contract.
Yeah, it really does make you think about, the whole publishing industry and what becomes a success and what doesn't. It's unpredictable.
It really is. But I think it also speaks volumes about Coelho himself and how much he believed in his own work.
Absolutely. He mentions that even with that initial, silence, the lack of response, he never lost faith in the story. Because to him, the book's journey mirrored his own, searching for a treasure that in the end was within him all along, this capacity to write.
Right.
And that's kind of the seed of this idea of the personal legend, right? It's one of the book's central themes. Recognizing your true calling, even when it's not clear, even when the path ahead is kind of murky. Like, have you ever felt that pull towards something, even when outwardly things weren't encouraging?
Yeah, for sure. That feeling, that you're being pulled in a certain direction no matter what, even when it doesn't make sense. And I think that's what's so powerful about Coelho's experience with this book. He had that inner belief and he stuck with it.
Yeah. And he actually found a different publisher in Brazil. And gradually, through word of mouth, the book started to, find its readership. It wasn't an overnight success or anything.
Yeah, it's more of a slow burn.
Exactly. A gradual process. And then, of course, you have this interesting moment. An American was visiting Brazil and by chance came across the book, brought it back to the U.S., and eventually, it got published here. But even then, it wasn't like an instant bestseller. It still took time for it to gain traction.
But that's often, I think, a sign that there's a deeper connection. When it's not just a fad.
Yeah.
When it slowly builds momentum over time.
Right, exactly.
And then, of course, you have these pivotal moments, like when people like Bill Clinton and Madonna mention The Alchemist. And then things really took off.
Yeah, it was like a catalyst, This underlying support suddenly became this huge phenomenon over 300 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and it's been translated into over 80 languages. It's just amazing.
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable journey for a book that at first nobody wanted. What do you think, though? What was that spark that kept Coelho going, even when at first it seemed like nobody cared about his book?
Well, he said that his intention for The Alchemist was pretty straightforward, actually. He wanted to explore his own soul, his own quest, his personal treasure.
Right.
And he was fascinated by this idea of omens, these signs from the universe, or maybe even from God, as a way of communication. So, the book dives into those themes, this individual journey, this search for a treasure, and how important it is to listen to those, subtle signs along the way.
And even before we meet Santiago, the main character, there's this really interesting prologue, which sort of sets the tone for the whole book, don't you think? It's a different take on the myth of Narcissus. So the lake weeps, but not because Narcissus is gone, but because it can no longer see its own beauty reflected in his eyes. What did you think about that?
It really challenges you to think about perspective, doesn't it? How we often see things only from our own limited point of view. It's not about Narcissus. It's about the lake's own perception.
Right, exactly.
Maybe what we think is all about us is actually about something much bigger, something else entirely. And it suggests that in this book, looking beyond the obvious is really key.
It really is. And then we're introduced to Santiago, the shepherd boy. We find him arriving at this abandoned church as the sun is setting. And he's using a book as a pillow. He even wishes they were thicker, for comfort, and so they would last longer.
Right.
It's very practical, very grounded, simple shepherd.
But even in that detail, a shepherd who reads, that already hints that there's more to Santiago than meets the eye. It sets him apart.
Definitely.
And then there's this recurring dream that he keeps having. He always wakes up before it ends, before it reaches its conclusion. And this dream, this unresolved image, it becomes the thing that really sets him on his journey. Have you ever had a dream that felt so real, so vivid, that it stuck with you, maybe even influenced what you did?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Those dreams that feel like more than just a dream, they feel like some sort of message or something.
Right.
And for Santiago, it's that catalyst. It's what makes him start questioning.
Exactly. And I think what's also interesting is his relationship with his sheep. He talks about this kind of unspoken connection that they have, how they know his routine, how he's become so attuned to their needs. But he also has this kind of unsettling thought about their complete trust in him, even if you were to, lead them to harm.
It's like this sense of responsibility, but also, maybe he sees himself as slightly removed from them. Like he's aware of things they're not.
Right. There's that awareness. And then we see this change in his routine. He makes his annual trip to this town to sell the wool, and he's looking forward to seeing the merchant's daughter. He reflects on being able to read, a skill that he learned because of that path he didn't take, that seminary his parents had wanted him to go to. So there are echoes, even in his current life, of these other possibilities.
Oh, absolutely. And he enjoys those moments with her, telling her stories from his travels, things that his sheep would never experience. And he kind of feels this pull, to maybe stay there, to settle down, which is the opposite of the freedom that he has as a shepherd.
Yeah.
It's that tension between the comfortable and the exciting, the unknown.
Exactly.
And it's a classic dilemma.
Yeah, he values his freedom, his ability to make his own choices. Mm-hmm. Unlike his sheep, they have to follow him. He sees how content they are, just with their basic needs being met. But he yearns for something more, something deeper. And it's this yearning, this kind of underlying dissatisfaction that makes him think of the old woman in Tarifa who interprets dreams. It's like a turning point for him.
Yeah, it really is. So he sets off to find her. And when he gets to her house, it's interesting. There's all this religious imagery, but it also feels a little bit folkloric even. Mm-hmm. And then she takes his hands and starts praying. And it sounds like a gypsy prayer, which actually triggers this kind of primal fear in Santiago. It's like this cultural prejudice maybe, or personal.
Right.
It introduces that element of the unknown, of the maybe slightly unsettling.
Right.
And he recounts his dream. He's in this field with his sheep. And then this child appears and leads him to the pyramids of Egypt, where he's told he'll find treasure. It's a pretty simple dream, but the way the old woman interprets it gives this huge significance.
Yeah, her interpretation is key. She says dreams are the language of God, and that Santiago alone can truly understand, the language of his own soul. And she sets a strange price, no fee up front, but 1/10 of the treasure if he finds it. And her interpretation is pretty direct. Go to the pyramids, that's where your riches are. What'd you think about that? That very straightforward, simple interpretation.
It seems, on the surface, almost too simple, right?
Yeah.
Like maybe even a bit cliche.
Yeah.
But perhaps that's part of it. The treasure itself isn't necessarily the complex thing. It's the journey, and what you learn along the way. Yeah. She's almost like this catalyst, She gives him the initial push.
Right.
But she also sets this condition that makes him responsible for the outcome.
It's true.
And Santiago's immediate reaction is really relatable, I think. He's kind of disappointed, maybe even feels a little foolish, like he went to all this trouble for nothing.
Right.
But then he remembers that he hasn't actually paid anything.
Yeah.
And he has this thought about, how the simplest things in life are sometimes the most extraordinary, that wisdom we often miss in our everyday lives. But he decides to just dismiss the whole thing, go back to his reality, his routine. He goes to the market, buys a new book, a thicker one this time, almost like he's trying to bury himself in it.
Distract himself.
Exactly. He has some wine, some food, just trying to be present. To forget about the dream. Have you ever tried to, ignore that inner voice, that intuition?
Oh, yeah. I think we all have at some point. It's that human tendency, to resist the unknown. But usually it doesn't work out too well. Life has a way of nudging you back on track. And that's exactly what happens with Santiago. And his nudge comes in the form of Melchizedek,
right,
the king of Salem. He meets him in the marketplace. And their interaction is pretty strange right from the start. The old man criticizes his book. And then he starts revealing these very personal details about Santiago's life. It's clear right away that this isn't just any old guy.
No, definitely not. And when Santiago asks him about, the world's greatest lie, his answer goes straight to the core of the book's message. It's the belief that at some point we lose control of our own lives, that fate takes over.
Right.
And Santiago, he initially pushes back. He says, well, I chose to be a shepherd, but is it really a choice? Or is he just following the path of least resistance?
Exactly. It's a good question to ask ourselves, how much control we actually have, how much is circumstance, how much is society's expectations.
It's true.
And Melchizedek, he challenges Santiago's idea of free will, first by revealing who he truly is. And then he shows this kind of supernatural knowledge of Santiago's past. He writes in the sand the names of his parents, his time in the seminary, even the name of the merchant's daughter, things that Santiago's never told anyone. It's a powerful moment.
It is. And it's after that, that moment of astonishment that Melchizedek introduces the idea of the personal legend, that thing you've always wanted to do, deep down. He says that we all have this desire when we're young, but then there's this mysterious force that convinces us it's impossible. What do you think that mysterious force is?
I think it's probably a lot of things, Fear of failure, definitely. Worrying about what other people will think, fear of judgment. And just societal pressures in general, expectations and norms, all those things that push us away from our true passions. And maybe just, inertia, staying comfortable even if you're not really happy.
Right.
But Melchizedek kind of frames this force as something that's actually good for us in a way.
Yeah, a test.
A test, exactly. He also introduces this idea of beginner's luck. You know how when you start something new, often things go really smoothly at first?
Yeah.
Like you're being given a little push, some encouragement. Exactly. Almost like the universe is saying, go for it. But then, as you get closer to your goal, things often get harder. Like it's testing your commitment. And then, of course, he gives us that incredible line, when you want something, all the universe conspires in helping you to achieve it.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be true in your life at all?
There definitely are those moments, where things seem to just line up.
Yeah.
It's not always easy. It's not always, a straight path or anything. But you feel like you're being helped along.
Yeah.
Like little bits of serendipity pop up along the way.
Right. And to illustrate this, Melchizedek tells the story of this baker who dreamed of traveling the world, but he prioritized his work and saving money for later, someday. And he never realized that he could have just gone for it at any time.
Yeah.
It's a reminder to not put off your dreams.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do that. And I think the story of the baker also shows how these societal expectations can really hold us back. Being a baker is seen as a respectable job, but a shepherd is maybe seen as less ambitious. It highlights how these external values that we place on things can really drown out our own inner compass. And you can see that Santiago's taking this to heart, right? Thinking about maybe the baker back in the merchant's daughter's town.
Right. Living a life that wasn't quite what he wanted, what he truly desired.
Exactly. It's a moment of, internal reckoning for him. And then he sees a ticket office for voyages to Africa, where Egypt is, where the pyramids are. And he hesitates. He's not sure if he should sell his sheep,
That's a big decision.
It is. It's his whole life, his livelihood. And he's starting to feel that fear, that uncertainty creeping in. He even thinks about going back to what he knows, shepherding. But the pull is strong, that Levanter wind that he talks about, the scent of possibility, and that image of the treasure.
Yeah, he takes a leap of faith, decides to sell his flock. He trusts Melchizedek, believes that a king wouldn't lie to him, just for a few sheep. And he feels alone, yeah. But he also recognizes the power of money, how it can open up possibilities. As he travels to Africa, he thinks about what the old king said about omens, about signs. And he realizes that being a shepherd, spending all that time in nature, it had already taught him how to read those signs. It's like a skill he already had, but didn't realize until that moment.
He had that intuition, but he didn't quite know he had it.
Yeah.
And when he arrives in Tangier, it's not the adventure he maybe imagined. He meets this stranger who offers to help him, speaks his language.
Seems friendly enough.
Right. And Santiago, maybe still riding that wave of beginner's luck, puts his trust in this guy.
Right, trusting that the universe has got his back.
But then, of course, he gets robbed. All his money, gone, just like that. It's a brutal awakening, to the reality of the world beyond what he knows. And his despair is really palpable. He feels betrayed, not just by the thieves, but maybe even by the universe itself.
It is a low point for him. All that security, gone, and he probably feels foolish for trusting so easily.
Right.
He thinks back to the bar owner, how he seemed uneasy about the guide. It was a warning, a sign he ignored. And in his despair, he holds on to the stones Melchizedek gave him, Urim and Thummim, the only tangible link he has left to his dream.
Yeah. And in that moment of total loss, he makes a really powerful decision. He could just give up, become bitter.
Yeah.
But He chooses to see himself not as a victim, but as an adventurer, like it's all part of the quest.
It's a shift in perspective, right? It allows him to move forward.
It really does. And it leads him to offer his services to the crystal merchant.
Right. And the merchant sees Santiago arriving at the same time as these new customers, and he takes it as a good omen.
He does. The merchant is interesting. He's very traditional, cautious. He doesn't like change. But he sees something in Santiago, some potential. And when Santiago offers to work, to earn enough money to get to Egypt, the merchant kind of laughs and tells him it's a really long way. That'll take him forever to earn that much.
Right.
And it's almost too much for Santiago to handle. He nearly gives up completely. But the merchant offers to pay for his passage back to Spain. And surprisingly, this gives Santiago this renewed determination to not go back, but to earn his way forward.
It's interesting, it wasn't what he expected, but it reignited that fire.
It did. And he really makes a difference at the crystal shop. He comes up with all these new ideas, like an outdoor display and serving tea in the crystal glasses. Right. Things really start to pick up.
The business is booming, but the merchant himself, he's still kind of resistant to all this change.
He is.
He reveals that he's afraid to achieve his own personal legend, which is to go on a pilgrimage to Mecca.
Right.
He's afraid that once he achieves that, his life will have no purpose.
He finds comfort in the dreaming, in the anticipation, almost.
Right. And he clings to that. Have you ever felt that way? Hesitant to fully embrace something you really want?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's easier to dream about something than it is to actually do it. What happens after you achieve it.
Exactly. And so for Santiago, 3 months go by. He's working hard. The shop is doing great. He figures he could probably go back to Spain with even more sheep than he had before, maybe in 6 months or so.
Wow.
He even learns Arabic. But Egypt feels far off again. He finds a kind of happiness, a contentment in this new routine.
Right. But that inherent desire to find his treasure, it never really goes away.
Yeah.
And eventually it comes bubbling back up. He has this idea of selling tea in those beautiful crystal glasses to the customers who climb the hill to the shop.
Right.
But the merchant is hesitant. He's stuck in his ways.
He is. And it's at this point that the concept of maktub becomes really important. It is written.
Right.
The merchant explains that it's about accepting fate, accepting what's meant to be. And while he embodies this idea in his own life, he does agree to Santiago's tea idea. Maybe he sees something in Santiago's determination.
Yeah, his drive.
His unwillingness to give up. And of course, the tea idea is a huge success. It's like the shop is suddenly this bustling hub.
It really is. It even inspires some of the other shopkeepers who haven't been doing so well.
Right. They see the potential.
Exactly. And after almost a year, Santiago has more than enough money. Not just to go to Egypt, but enough to buy even more sheep and to pay for his return trip and import licenses. And he tells the merchant that he's leaving.
Right.
He urges him to finally go to Mecca to fulfill his own dream. But the merchant, all he says is, maktub.
He accepts his fate.
He does. And he blesses Santiago's journey. And as Santiago's packing his things, he finds those 2 stones again. Urim and Thummim. They're like this powerful symbol of his quest. And he has this realization. He thinks, the sheep, they didn't teach me Arabic. They taught me something much more important. They taught me the language of enthusiasm, of love, of having a dream and going for it.
It's that universal language of the heart.
It really is.
And he feels this renewed confidence. He feels like he can do anything.
But in all this excitement, he also remembers what the old king told him. To pursue his dreams, to follow the omens. But the old king didn't warn him about all the hard things he'd face. The betrayal.
The harshness of the desert.
Exactly. All the people who give up on their dreams. And he also notes that the old king didn't say anything about getting more money.
Right.
Like the focus shouldn't be on the material wealth. The focus should be on the journey itself, on the personal legend. And he starts to feel this pull to go back to shepherding. But he's not satisfied with that anymore. He wonders if it was ever really his true calling. He goes back to the bar where he was robbed, and they treat him really kindly. It's almost like a sign of his own inner transformation. And he decides that he can always go back to shepherding, but this opportunity to reach the pyramids, that might not come again.
Right. He's come so far. He's learned so much.
Yeah, the old king's wisdom, and the fact that he's actually geographically closer to his goal, it's enough to reignite his resolve.
It is.
And he finds out that the crystal merchant uses these caravans to transport his goods across the desert. And trusting his intuition and Urim and Thummim, he sets out once more. He remembers what Melchizedek said, "I am always nearby when someone wants to realize their personal legend."
It's comforting, isn't it?
It is. At the supplier's warehouse, he meets the Englishman, another seeker on a different kind of quest.
He's completely absorbed in his books,
He is. He's looking for this alchemist, someone who can teach him the secrets of turning metal into gold and who knows about the elixir of life.
Right, so it's like this parallel journey, right? They're both looking for a kind of treasure, but it manifests differently. The Englishman is focused on knowledge and the secrets of transformation, of immortality even, but it all points to this idea that there are many ways to pursue your personal legend.
Right. It's not one size fits all.
Exactly.
And they join this huge caravan to cross the Sahara, all these different people from all walks of life. And the leader of the caravan, he really emphasizes obedience and discipline because the desert can be dangerous.
It can be unforgiving.
It can be. And Santiago and the Englishman buy their camels, and they begin this shared experience. And as they're traveling, the Englishman tells Santiago about his alchemical research.
Yeah.
And Santiago starts to reflect on everything that's happened, all these seemingly random events that led him to this point. He starts to see them as interconnected steps in his personal legend. It's like that saying, life is what happens when you're busy making other plans.
Exactly. And the Englishman, he introduces Santiago to the concept of the soul of the world, this idea that everything is connected, everything is constantly changing. It's a different way of thinking about the universe conspiring to help you.
Right. And Santiago begins to see everything differently. He observes the caravan, the desert.
And how they interact.
Exactly. And he notices that the desert almost seems to be testing the travelers.
It does.
The Englishman, though, is still mostly in his books.
Head in a book.
Exactly. He's looking for knowledge through reading, not through experience.
Right. It's a contrast, isn't it? Two different approaches to the same thing.
It really is.
Yeah.
And despite some detours, the caravan follows the stars and reaches this oasis, a place of safety and abundance. Al-Fayoum. A place of peace. And there's some strict rules. You have to surrender all weapons.
Yeah.
And surprisingly, the Englishman, he hands over his revolver.
Yeah.
He says it helps him trust people. Maybe it's a sign that he's starting to change too,
Right. Maybe he's starting to open up a little bit.
Yeah. And Santiago, he's noticing that as he gets closer to his goal, things seem to be getting harder.
It's like that final test of his commitment.
It is. He's learning that patience is key, being able to see the signs and not rushing things. And then he meets Fatima.
At the well.
At the well. And it's an instant connection. He knows right away that she's the one. This love that transcends time and place, all of it. It's a beautiful scene, isn't it? Like recognizing your soulmate.
It is. Very romantic.
And it's Fatima who points out this mysterious man in the distance, someone who's rumored to have all this wisdom and who talks to the spirits of the desert.
The alchemist.
Right. And of course, the Englishman is immediately intrigued.
Off he goes to find him.
And Santiago realizes that he's loved Fatima even before he met her. He remembers that scent on the Levanter wind, from her homeland.
Yeah, carried across the desert.
He believes that his love for her will help him find his treasure. And he tells her, I love you, Fatima. I want to be with you.
And she drops her water vessel. A small gesture, but so symbolic.
It is. And he vows to wait for her. He even sees the war that brought him there as a blessing in disguise, because it led him to her.
Right. And Fatima, she understands the nature of these desert men. They're always searching for something.
She does. She's proud of them for it. And she refills her vessel and she leaves, seemingly accepting his path. They start meeting every day, but there's always this underlying tension.
Of the war. And then the caravan leader announces they can't go any further because the fighting's getting worse.
It's a huge obstacle for Santiago. But Fatima's reaction is amazing. She tells him to go, that she's been waiting for him.
She says he's part of her dream now.
She does.
She tells him to follow his personal legend, even if it means they have to be apart. She compares their love to the desert, unchanging, timeless.
Yeah.
She uses the word maktub, accepting fate.
She understands, that desert women wait.
They do. And that they're men, they become part of the world.
They do.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the Englishman is still hard at work, trying to unlock the secrets of alchemy. And Santiago, he's wrestling with these more internal questions.
About love and loss.
Exactly. About what it means to love someone and let them go.
He's really thinking about it. And then, while he's watching these hawks flying overhead, he has this vision of an army attacking the oasis.
Right. He knows it's an omen, something he can't ignore.
He tells the camel driver, who takes him to the tribal chieftains, and the seer, who usually predicts the future using, quigs and things. He doesn't even use them. He says, the present holds the secret. Every day brings eternity. It's about paying attention to the here and now.
It really is.
The chieftains, they listen to Santiago's warning, but they're skeptical because the oasis is supposed to be neutral ground. But one of the elders, he reminds them about the importance of tradition, of listening to the desert.
Right.
So they decide to test Santiago. They'll arm themselves for a day and be ready. But the stakes are high. If his vision's right, he'll get gold. But if he's wrong,
there will be consequences.
Yeah.
And Santiago, he's terrified. He understands that his connection to the soul of the world comes with a price. But he accepts it.
He draws strength from the camel driver's acceptance of fate, that idea of maktab.
Right. And then suddenly, the alchemist arrives.
It's pretty dramatic.
It is. This mysterious figure full of power. And he confronts Santiago.
He questions him, challenges him.
He does. And Santiago, he stands his ground.
Right.
He explains that his ability to understand the omens is a gift from the same source that created everything.
Right.
And the alchemist, he seems to accept this. He reveals who he is. And he won Santiago against, trusting the desert too much. It's unpredictable.
It is. And he tells Santiago to find him after the battle if he survives.
And the next morning, Santiago's vision comes true. The oasis is attacked.
Just as he saw it.
And later,